Emptying out those closets? Donating old clothing? If you have gently used items that you're not using anymore, donate them to St. Vinny's thrift stores. Y'all, the money generated from your donated goods at St. Vinny's helps feed the hungry, clothe the vulnerable, and provide essential medicine to the uninsured. All your donations will stay right here in Dane County. Call St. Vinny's at 608-278-2920, extension 1 to schedule your free home pickup today. Hey, it's your host, Bianca, popping in to tell you about our new CityCast Madison Neighbors program. I know you've heard us talk about membership before, and many of you are already part of it. Well, it's got a new name. We're calling it CityCast Madison Neighbors because we've learned that people who support CityCast Madison are people who care deeply about the city and want to make it better. They're just the kind of neighbors this city needs. We're also adding benefits. CityCast Madison neighbors still have access to ad-free podcast listening and an exclusive weekly local events preview. But now you also get regular events like happy hours with other CityCast Madison neighbors, local volunteering meetups, and other members-only events where we explore and better our city together. And you get to shout out a local business or nonprofit you love on the show and in the Madison Minutes newsletter. For $10 a month, you can become a CityCast Madison neighbor today by going to membership.citycast.fm. That's membership.citycast.fm. We couldn't make the show without people like you supporting it, and we're so excited for you to be a part of it. Thanks a million.
Today on CityCast Madison. Democrats celebrated a major victory this month with the election of Justice Susan Crawford to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Then, shortly after, the leader of the state's party, Ben Wickler, announced he'd step down at the end of his term. So what gives? And what's next for the Democratic Party of Wisconsin? We sat down with Wickler to find out. It's Monday, April 28th. I'm executive producer Haley Sperling, and here's what Madison's talking about. Real quick before we get into my conversation with Ben Wickler, I wanted to remind y'all about our CityCast Madison Neighbors program. Here's the deal. We're about halfway through this campaign, and to stay on track with our goal, I need 10 new members to sign up to become a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm right now. Seriously, I'll give you a second. Since you're listening to our show, I know you love Madison, and one of the cool new perks of our Neighbors program is being able to shout out a local business or organization that you love on the podcast and in the newsletter. We want the show to shine a light on what makes this city great, and you can help us do that. Head to membership.citycast.fm to sign up. It's $10 a month or $100 a year, and it actually allows our show to keep going. That's membership.citycast.fm. All right, now let's talk politics. Ben Wickler, thank you so much for joining us today.
So good to be with you today.
We're so pleased to have you here on CityCast Madison. Earlier this month, Democrats celebrated a major victory with the decisive election of Judge Susan Crawford to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And then, less than 2 weeks later, you, the chair of the state Democratic Party, announced that you were going to be leaving your post. So what led to that decision? Why now?
Well, I think the best time to pass the torch in an organization is when it's in really strong shape. And I think the Supreme Court race this spring shows the strength of Wisconsin Democrats writ large. The party itself, the grassroots, amazing candidates like Susan Crawford, we're in really strong shape in a moment when it's critical that Democrats are in fighting trim. So for me, this is the right moment to kind of pass the torch to new leadership precisely because I'm confident that our party is going to be in a great position to keep winning going forward. And that means I can take a breath and then figure out what else I can usefully do as we go forward, knowing that the party is going to keep driving.
I'd love for you to expand on that. What does good shape look like to you in the Wisconsin Democratic Party?
So the first thing is thousands and thousands of volunteers who are deeply committed to engaging not just when there's an election around the corner, but also on a year-round basis. We have neighborhood teams, hundreds of them across the state, that knock on doors of people in their communities, that organize people to friend bank and reach out to people that they know. That was a huge part of the turnout operation for the 2025 Supreme Court race. And it's been going continuously since 2017. Maybe Minnesota and Michigan are the only states with anything close to this level of on-the-ground organization. And it's in a category by itself in terms of the level of continuous organization that happens here. What we saw this spring is that the energy that we all were part of last fall, which was a big part of how Tammy Baldwin was able to win re-election, even amidst the Republican wave that came through, and meant that we actually added votes in the presidential race relative to Biden, even though we came up short ultimately in the presidential race. That energy carried forward directly to the spring. It's not like everything shut down. It's not like data was lost. It's not like volunteers left the connection with the party. We were able to run a continuous operation that ran from the fall to the spring and will keep going for the 2026 Supreme Court race and through the midterms. So people is the most important thing. The second thing is our staff. Our staff at the party is superb. We have people with deep expertise who could have all kinds of amazing other jobs and a lot of alumni who are leading national organizations now. But we've built up a depth of professional talent on the West Dems team, starting with our executive director, Sarah Abel, and a whole bunch of other folks that are doing just phenomenal work day in and day out. And that is something that I'm excited for the next chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin to be able to carry forward and working with these amazing folks. The third thing is our relationships of trust with donors small and large across the country. So we have funds in the bank to support the continued work. We have monthly donors who chip in every month because they know that when you donate to the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, we really stretch every dollar. We put it to work to make the biggest difference that we can. So this is a party that's going to be able to keep on fighting at this extraordinary level going forward because we'll have the resources and the talent to be able to do it. And then the last thing I'd say is the culture of what we do, the conviction that voters in every corner of Wisconsin are vital to our success. The most rural areas and Milwaukee and Madison, the big urban areas and suburbs and small towns, the belief that we should work across race and ethnicity and gender, geography, generation, the idea that we should fight, include, respect, and empower. That's been my watchword since I ran for chair the first time. And we try to bring that to our work, this sense that we're really about helping people discover and build their own power. If we're able to continue that, then you can have leadership transitions, you can have different campaigns, you can have different candidates, and the strength keeps aggregating and building on itself. And that's ultimately the vision of organizing, is that you do things that make you stronger afterwards, whether you win or lose that particular fight. And I think my approach to this job has been very much as an organizer, as well as a communicator and fundraiser and strategist, but really an organizer at heart who believes that ultimately the power of any movement, of any political party, comes from the people within it taking power into their own hands.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have really built up a lot of momentum, and that clearly showed in the April election if we look at our turnout numbers. I want to take a quick step back. So you were elected as chair of the state Democratic Party back in 2019. This was just a few years after the 2016 election, and we all know how that one ended. But what folks might not know is that Donald Trump's 2016 win came after nearly 3 decades of our state going for the Democratic presidential candidate. And so I'm curious to get your take. What was it like to step into the role as the head of the state's Democratic Party in the shadow of that 2016 election with another looming right around the corner?
In that moment, when I was elected chair, Governor Evers, Attorney General Call, then Treasurer Godlewski had just won. We'd swept every statewide office for the first time since 1982. But those statewide wins were on very small margins. Senator Baldwin won in a landslide, which was tremendous. But all those other races, it was less than 1.5 points in each of those races. And Republicans had immediately executed a power grab for control of a lot of the powers that the governor and attorney general had been elected to wield. So Governor Scott Walker signed this power grab lame duck legislation, which was then rubber stamped by the right-wing majority on the state Supreme Court. And it felt and looked like Republicans just weren't willing to give up power, even when Democrats won elections. On top of that, we'd won a lot of presidential races, but they'd been incredibly close. So in 2000, Wisconsin was the second closest state in the country. In 2004, it was the closest state in the country. Both of those were under half a percentage point victories. Obama won in landslides twice. And I think that led to some sort of national forgetting that Wisconsin was such a battleground. But then in 2010, Walker won. In 2012, Walker won again in the recall by an even larger margin. Then Democrats won the presidential election that year and the Senate race that year, but then 2014, Walker won for a third time. And Republicans by that time had really rigged the state. They had suppressed the vote. They had gerrymandered legislative districts. They'd smashed unions. It got even worse in the year after that. Walker ran for president briefly, and then Trump won Wisconsin. And I think a lot of folks nationally started reaching this conclusion that Wisconsin was going the way of Iowa, Ohio, Indiana, states that had been sometimes blue or purple, but now were red. And that was the fear. And I had always wanted to move home to raise my kids. I grew up in Wisconsin, was very active in politics growing up, as well as just generally in our state's progressive traditions, with Earth Day protests, in the tradition of Gaylord Nelson. And
very Madison of you.
Very Madison of me. I grew up supporting my teachers union and marching with them. I had an underground student newspaper inspired by The Onion that was constantly, fighting for corporate influence-free public education, and eventually started writing for The Onion. So I've always loved Wisconsin. I've always loved Madison. I wanted to move home, but it started to look like moving home might mean that I was coming to a place that, in fact, was going to be dominated by Republicans for the foreseeable future. And in 2017, my wife and I started talking and made the decision at the beginning of 2018 to move back to Wisconsin with a big open question of whether this was a state where Republicans had succeeded in fundamentally kind of breaking the political culture and warping our laws so much that even when the public didn't like what they were doing, they wouldn't be able to throw them out of power. And the truth is, it has taken years to unpick the lock that Republicans used to lock in the chains that they wrapped around our democracy. We are finally at a point where if a majority of voters vote for one party or the other for the state legislature, they determine who has the majority in the state legislature. And only that makes it possible to have the public's views turn into the law of the land, which is what it says in the Capitol, fighting Bob the Follett, the will of the people shall be the law of the land. That is supposed to be kind of table stakes for how democracy is supposed to work. It is supposed to be completely, obvious that, what people want is what's supposed to turn into the law, and people choose their representatives. But it has been so far from reality here for so long that it is almost hard to imagine and hard to remember. So when I came into the office, my dream was that we'd get to a point where we could have a Democratic trifecta with a governor, the state legislature, both chambers, and a Supreme Court that believed in democracy and didn't just, advance right-wing partisan interests. And met with our staff and said that was our North Star. But it was, if I go back in time, really, here we are looking at the possibility of achieving that in 2026. So that is at least a 7-year project going from 2019 to 2026, and folks will be sworn in 2027. So that is a solid 8 years from that moment that I first came in. I think we're on that track now, and that is what is so exciting to me, and that's why I'm so excited about the political future of our state, and so proud of the thousands of people who've made it their business to make this possible.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you've made, especially because I've had conversation with friends who are concerned about their future in Wisconsin, about whether or not they want to live here in the future because of the way that our state government operates. You mentioned sort of picking that lock around the chains of our democracy, quote unquote. And you've mentioned some of the wins that you've had here. Do you have any major highlights of your career as chair?
Haley, I do. It's been such a roller coaster. The first one was the spring of 2020 when we had this wrenching situation where the governor called for the elections to be postponed because of COVID. As it happened in so many other states, Republicans sued. They got the state Supreme Court to override the governor's executive order. The U.S. Supreme Court followed suit immediately and curtailed absentee ballots. Republicans had insisted on going forward with this election, even though most of the polling places in Milwaukee had closed by that point. And it seemed like they were essentially using COVID as a voter suppression tactic. And I thought we were going to lose because of that. And we were gearing up to sue and say, they had basically, gone way over the line in preventing voters from being able to actually cast their ballots. And then it was a week after the election, there was the final deadline for absentee ballots to arrive. And the numbers started coming in. And we realized we had won, and we had won not by a small margin. It was a double-digit landslide victory, and my brain exploded. That was the first amazing moment. Jill Karofsky's election in 2020, and she was such a fighter and such an amazing candidate. That was the first time the Friends of Democracy were able to defeat Dan Kelly. So that was 2020. Then that fall, the presidential victory, the convention was kind of a low light when it turned out that we weren't actually going to gather in Milwaukee.
Yeah, that was a bit of I don't want to say a swing and a miss, but, it was a bit underwhelming on that end, right?
I mean, it was an amazing virtual convention. Like, it was a really, for everyone participating at home, it was really cool. But a little personal highlight was that I did get to go in to the convention operation itself and sit there behind in the control room and watching all the TV screens as the thing was being broadcast. And so if you're ever a state party chair during a global pandemic, I recommend to everyone that you make sure to show up at the convention to see how it all works behind the scenes. That was 2020. 21, we had the superintendent of public schools race, Jill Underley, and we saw the continued strength of that organizing model. 22, there was a flood of local candidates that were being pushed by the kind of both the Stop the Stealer election deniers and then by the kind of like anti-critical race theory, Moms for Liberty types, these phantom threats of, indoctrination of children. And we were able to defeat them and win most of the local races that we were fighting in that spring. That fall, Governor Evers becoming the first governor in 60 years to win a governor's race during a Democratic presidency in Wisconsin was just a total thrill. And the thing that I was most panicked about in the final stretch was Republican attempts to get supermajorities in both chambers of the state legislature. And we wound up winning 2 seats that prevented Republican supermajority in the assembly with a combined vote total of combined vote margin of 2,499 votes. So that was less than 0.1% of the votes cast in the state, but it was enough to save the veto so that the governor could veto Republican legislation and Republicans couldn't override it. So that was an incredible relief and something that Leader Greta Neubauer and all the Assembly Dems and the folks who fought in the Senate that did critical work to achieve. Still really pleased about that. 2023, flipping the state Supreme Court majority, that was a mammoth fight. That was the first state Supreme Court race that became a total national obsession in this way.
Huge. And expensive.
Oh my God, so expensive and such an intense fight. And that was a race where, as it got towards the end, we thought it was getting closer and closer because we were underestimating the wave of Democratic turnout, which is something that happened, again, most recently in 25. But it was not clear that we were going to win, and certainly not going to win by double digits. Like, it felt like it was getting close as we got into the final stretch. Trump was indicted the week before that election, and the internal polling started looking tighter, like Republicans had gotten pissed off and were going to go turn out in response. And then Democratic turnout, pro-democracy, pro-freedom, anti-Dobbs abortion ban turnout went through the roof. So that was a huge win. So much more happened in 24 and 25, but I'll just end with this piece. Something that wasn't an election is one of the things I'm most proud of, which is the moment that the Republicans geared up to try to impeach Janet Protasiewicz in the summer of 2023 to try to stop her from doing her job once she took office on August 1st to prevent a fair consideration of the maps. And that seemed, externally like almost a foregone conclusion that they were going to do it. They were talking about it. There were rumors that they'd set a date for the impeachment. And we were able to work with Leader Neubauer and Leader Hasselbein in the state legislature and organize every Democratic state legislator and this huge surge of thousands of volunteers across the state with ads, with organizing, with press conferences, and turn it into a political nightmare for the GOP to have even approached this red line that should never be crossed about political impeachments to stop someone from doing something that is part of their job. And they backed away from it. And that both meant that the Supreme Court could, duly consider the legislative maps. And also, I think, helped ensure that Republicans didn't impeach our nonpartisan election administrator, which also was something that was a big push within the Republican ranks to try to do. And I think that was a real win for our democracy. And it's like the dog that didn't bark. Our state would be on such a different trajectory if Republicans had smashed through that red line. And I think it would have been bad for both parties and for the public, most importantly, because if legislators overturn elections when they don't like the results, that's just a fundamental breakage in the way democracy is supposed to work. So because of that, we had fair maps in 2024. We were able to flip 10 assembly seats and 4 state Senate seats, and we have a path to a trifecta in 2026. Tammy Baldwin's reelection was another huge highlight for me. And then this spring's election is one that I'm so deeply grateful to Susan Crawford for her tenacity and her fight, and all the people around the state who worked so hard. Defeating Elon Musk and Brett Schimmel and Donald Trump on April 1st felt like exactly what the country needed to show ourselves that we're still a democracy and we still can be a democracy. So that will put a smile on my face whenever I think about it.
Seduction, danger, and eternal consequences. Join Madison Opera for Mozart's Don Giovanni, a legendary classic that has thrilled and scandalized audiences from its first note to its last for centuries. According to his not-so-little black book, Don Giovanni has seduced thousands of women across Europe. Over the course of a dramatic few days, his misadventures come back to literally haunt him, as Mozart's brilliant score whirls people in and out of the Don's mist. This weekend only, take your seat in Overture Hall and experience captivating drama and sensational music in this enthralling masterpiece. You only have 2 chances to see Don Giovanni, so join in the excitement of opening night on Friday, May 2nd at 7:30 p.m. Or treat yourself to the Sunday matinee on May 4th at 2:30 p.m. What better way to liven up spring than with riveting scandal, opulent and deadly dinner parties, and supernatural revenge? Tickets start at just $20, so get yours today at madisonopera.org. Remember those fun nights back in the day at summer camp? Ready to make more memories? Camp Aldo is the adult summer camp event of the season, held on Saturday, July 12th from 2 to 7 p.m. at the Aldo Leopold Nature Center, located at 330 Femright Drive in Monona, Wisconsin. Camp Aldo is an incredibly fun day that supports kids' outdoor nature programs in Dane County. Expect rocket launches, tie-dye, friendship bracelet making, and other ridiculously fun competitions, like an additional ultimate relay that will have you reminiscing about your own camp days. And there are provisions. Tickets include unlimited locally brewed beverages and a reusable event cup. In other words, free beer. And food trucks will also be on site. There's a suggested donation of $60 that gets you into the event with the cup and the beer. So don't miss out. Sign up for Camp Aldo today. Reserve your tickets at aldoleopoldnaturecenter.org. Yes, your mom wants you to call her. This Mother's Day, give her a call and give her an Aura digital picture frame. My sister lives 2,000 miles away, and I often miss her when I'm out doing something fun that she'd love. I have this photo of us roller skating on the boardwalk by Santa Monica Pier, and every time I see it, I feel the joy of that moment trying to skate and look cool. Aura Frames was named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter and featured in 495 gift guides last year. So the next time you need to call your mom, you can also send her a new pic of you from that trip you're telling her about right from your phone. Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. For a limited time, listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off plus free shipping on their best-selling Carver matte frame. That's auraframes.com, promo code CityCast. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply.
Before we get back into our conversation with Ben Wickler, I want to take a moment to give a massive thank you to some of our newest CityCast Madison neighbors. Thank you to Candace S.K., Joseph S., Diana C., Karen S., Laura D.M., Rebecca K., Dean Z., Sarah W., and Leah K. Whew, that was a lot of new neighbors. Every time someone becomes a CityCast Madison neighbor, I get a little ping online that lets me know we have a new friend. And it's seriously the highlight of my day. I mean, seriously, listen to this. Our new neighbor, Leah, sent in this note that said, quote, I moved to Madison in 2023 and wanted to know the community better and keep up with local news. A quick Google search got me to CityCast Madison and Madison Minutes, and I've been listening/reading at least once a week ever since. Thank you so much for bringing us local news and keeping it real, especially around politics. It's so important right now. Not to mention, you all seem to genuinely be good friends who love what you do, which is always a delight to listen to. Keep it up. Leah, thank you. And yes, the CityCast Madison team is definitely a tight-knit group. And if you become a neighbor, you'll get exclusive invites to hang out with us at neighbors-only events. So come be part of the squad. Alrighty, now let's get back into our conversation. I'd love to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about the future of the Democratic Party and how you see it, because right now it feels like the National Democratic Party is really at an inflection point. You know, to put it bluntly, there are a lot of terrifying things happening in our country right now. You know, I'm talking about the economy. I'm talking about deportations, people literally getting scooped up off the streets. And so I want to get your take because there are conflicting camps here. What, in your opinion, do you think is the best path forward for Democrats to win more nationally? Is it time to start talking about these highly contentious issues, or should they be rallying behind things that have the widest base of support?
So I think it's critical for Democrats to get comfortable talking about whatever might be coming up, because voters can tell if you're trying to dodge questions. At the same time, I think the core theory of political communication is you want to choose the terrain on which you're fighting. And you want to make the center of the political battle the issues that build a big winning coalition and divide the opposition. And so right now, Republicans are planning to make a multi-trillion-dollar attack cut, massive slashing cut on healthcare in order to fund tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy. That is something that Republicans are determined to do. It is like their party's most enduring core belief is that the richest people should get a gigantic pot of money and that poor people should pay for it, and the middle class. And it is something that totally unites Democrats and actually brings independents over towards Democrats and divides Republican voters. It's Republican politicians and mega donors who want that. It is not the general public. That is a fight that is going to come in Congress. It is something that Democrats can completely unite around. It is like the fight against Affordable Care Act repeal in 2017 and the fight against Social Security privatization in 2005. Democrats should bring as many people together as possible on that fight. And maybe we can stop the GOP from doing it, which would be the best possible thing. If we fail to do that, at least let's put up the biggest possible, most public fight to make absolutely clear that we are a party that believes that you should be able to see a doctor when you get sick, and we shouldn't be ripping away people's healthcare to hand money to the wealthiest people in the country. So we should make the fight about that. Now, you don't have to give up your other beliefs in order to fight in a very big public way on something that is basically a consensus view among the public and voters and something that Republican politicians are trying to do anyway. So I do think that it is incumbent on anyone who's in public office or in public life to think about what your core beliefs are and be ready to defend them and make your case for them. But that doesn't mean you want to turn every election into a referendum on your most controversial opinion. You want to bring the public's attention to the thing that is ideally right at the core of your own belief system that brings the vast majority of people together for values that are widely shared. I think of the core values of the Democratic Party as one, building an economy that works for working people, not just for the ultra wealthy, and two, the belief that every person is worthy of dignity and freedom and respect, and that we should fight to expand that circle of freedom and dignity and respect. And those two values kind of snake through the vast majority of what it is that Democrats fight for. There's obviously there's things like climate change. There's things like building a peaceful world and a just world, like foreign policy things. But the kind of core fundamental animating values, they're actually ideas that are present in just about every global religion, just about every American political community. They're things that most people subscribe to. They're things that Republicans try to make it seem like they agree with when they run campaigns. But Democrats actually fight for them. And the acid test comes so often around things like healthcare and public education and the tax code. Democrats are willing to put money where our values are, and Republicans might talk a good game about this or that, but fundamentally they try to loot the public treasury to benefit the wealthiest people. And I think right now, if you look at opinion polls, a lot of people are not hearing this. They're not experiencing this from Democrats. They're kind of getting their news about Democrats narrated by Republicans. And the way to change that, Democrats can give as many good speeches as they want. And it is good. I mean, I think Cory Booker's 25-hour speech in the Senate was great. I'm totally in favor of that.
Yeah, historic speech on the Senate floor. Yeah,
historic, big deal. But the thing that drives public attention the most and breaks through in social media the most is actually fights. It's conflict. It's when there's a disagreement about something. So just saying you're for something when nobody is actually against it, nobody actually notices or remembers that you said that. You have to be ready to pick a fight over a core issue of principle. And I think this battle that we're about to have nationally over healthcare versus tax cuts for the rich is a big, intensive example of that is about to walk into our field of view. Here in the state, the fight to support the governor's budget, the fight for postpartum Medicaid expansion. These are battles that are happening in real time. And Democrats can make really clear who we're for and what we're fighting for by also fighting against things that Republicans are trying to pass through without anyone noticing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like it's time to step up, time to start making your claims known. Be ambitious is what I'm hearing. And you're clearly an ambitious guy. You had a bid recently for the national chair of the Democratic Party. Of course, that one was unsuccessful. But we got to know, what's next for you? We know you want vacations with your family. I got to ask, because Wisconsin has a gubernatorial race in 2026. Are we going to see your name on the ballot?
I hope we see Governor Ears's name on the ballot. He is the most popular and successful politician in our state right now. If you look at the Marquette University Law School poll, he's been just tremendously successful as a governor, and he's got a slew of really good ideas that, with the Democratic trifecta in the legislature, he can sign into law. And that is the culmination of this work, is to actually get to pass the agenda. He is thinking through whether he runs again, and I think he's just dynamite. So that is my hope. I could imagine running for office one day. I don't know exactly what that will look like. I think it really matters who's in public office. I think having people who are ready to fight for these widely shared beliefs and the principles that make us proudest of our state and of our country, I think is really essential. I also think there's a ton of ways that you can contribute to the fight for the values that so many of us share and that are laced through the best parts of Wisconsin's history. I am thinking about writing a book. That is my potential next adventure.
Okay.
I'm talking to a lot of folks about different fights that are coming up. I think this administration is putting our whole country into a state of emergency, and I'd love for Wisconsin to kind of be the state that demonstrates how to fight back most successfully. I think that is in keeping with our best traditions as the birthplace of the progressive movement, of the Republican Party as a radical anti-slavery party, and this is a time of testing right now. And so there's a whole bunch to do. And I think we're going to need a lot of different people doing a lot of different things if we're going to get through it.
There's a lot to take in here, a lot of questions for our future. Ben Wickler, thank you so much for joining us on CityCast Madison today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Ben Wickler is the outgoing chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm executive producer Haley Sperling. If you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone you'd like to see run for office? And before we go, I want to remind you that we need 10 new members to join today, as Bianca would say. Will you help us get there? Go to membership.citycast.fm. I'll leave you with this note from one of our new members, Dean Z. When asked why he chose to join the CityCast Madison Neighbors, he said, quote, "Because you guys rock. Seriously, for keeping me informed and up to date on all things going on in our great city, and for helping remind us why it's still great." So real, Dean. Thank you. Alrighty, y'all. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Take care.